shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, thou desirest truth in the inward parts, in the hidden part thou shalt make me to know wisdom. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Make me to hear joy and the gladness, that the bones which thou hast broken may rejoice. Hide thy face from my sins, and blot out all mine iniquity.
Good morning, welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. Continuing in the book of Psalms, Psalm 29. Last 10 minutes of this day, we kind of dove in a little on 29. Mostly generally, we read it and we talked about the still small voice, which I don't like to read too much into because it's really the only example I have of that precise thing. But yeah, I think it's an important lesson that well, let's read this psalm and then we'll talk about it. Psalm 29. A psalm of David. Give unto the Lord, O ye mighty. Give unto the Lord glory and strength. Give unto the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. The voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The God of glory thundereth. The Lord is upon many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaketh the cedars. Yea, the Lord breaketh the cedars of Lebanon. He maketh them also to skip like a calf. Lebanon and Sirion like a young unicorn. The voice of the Lord divideth the flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shaketh the wilderness. The Lord shaketh the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord maketh the hinds to calve, and discovereth the forests. And in his temple doth everyone speak of his glory. The Lord sitteth upon the flood, yea, the Lord sitteth king forever. The Lord will give strength to his people, and the Lord will bless his people with peace. So, give unto the Lord. You know, it's funny, I actually remember there's a song based on this psalm, too. It passed several in a row, maybe not in a row, but a good portion of the last several that's not working. Of the last few psalms we've done, I recall as being partially made into songs. This one, too, it's actually an older sort of hymn. I actually heard it the first time I went to Passover. In the beauty of his holiness. I just can't remember the whole thing. And I remember they translated give something else, I think. Or did they? I think it's just give, huh? Come on. Alright. Yeah, you have to give. Of course, it's a funny thing we say, right? Give to the Lord glory and strength. Obviously, God has all the strength and glory he needs. He doesn't need any from me. I can't really give him anything he doesn't already have. But, you know, in a sense, of course, it means from our own, you know, I give the Lord glory by opening my mouth and glorifying him with my speech, with my voice. And I give strength to God by giving him my strength. I mean, though it all belongs to him, it's still, you know, what you can do. It's not like, sometimes people think the idea that, you know, that God knows all and that everything is essentially predestinated. That means there's nothing for them to do or participate, which is entirely wrong. Because That would only be true if we had the same perspective as God, meaning we knew exactly what was going to happen next to. You know what I mean? If we knew what was happening next to, but we don't know what's happening next. So we have to actively participate. We have to, it's part of what it means to exist. We become active participants in reality. We are not just passive bystanders watching destiny unfold. We are intimately involved. And it's an interesting thing because it's like God shapes the future by shaping what he puts into the world and thereby is able to control it. But we, from our perspective, it's all happening fresh and live and in real time. And that is exactly how, it's not just an illusion or anything. It's what our experience really is. But there's something sort of paradoxical about it. So give to the Lord, O ye mighty. It's an encouragement to be mighty in God. Mighty to do the works of God, mighty to obey his commands. And take up the power to hold under your own body, to bring into subjection all your members. You are strengthened with the strength of God. And since all the power and strength is coming from God, it's sort of like a returning. God has given me all these gifts, all this ability, power, this body, the strength of will and the strength of mind and body, all those things. He's given those to me. And the degree to which he's, not the degree, but the quantity of that gift, it's like the greater the gift, the greater God expects of us to bring in return. And again, it's in return, not so much in repayment, but in response. That, there is a natural response that we need to have. You can't be just have no conscientious response to the sacrifice of Christ. It's funny because I really think very few people do, except perhaps people who are kind of just going through the motions, getting raised up in church. I get that. But few people who truly are engaged mentally with turning their hearts to the Lord, have a completely careless response to the gospel. I'm sorry, there's a phlegm in the back of my throat. It's killing me. I'm going to go away. Mighty must have a mighty response. It go like the 10 talents. You got 10 talents, and they do. See, that's the thing that they do. Those who receive much do much. The gifts and calling of God come, and they are effectual. And so we can give to God all the glory of our hearts, all the strength of our being, and through praise and through obedience, are the primary things I say, through the words of our mouth and through our actions, glory and strength. And even in the times of Israel, there were so many temptations with other gods and stuff. Even strength sometimes just meant strength of being loyal. Or it could mean that. Give him the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. It's just such a interesting, it doesn't say that very often, the beauty of holiness. And I see nothing here in the language that needs me to break it back any further than they have done. That's that's a correct translation. In the beauty of holiness. The holiness literally means like apartness, singularity. It's something being set aside for a special purpose, usually religious. So like, this is the holy cup. We only use it to drink the wine, in the sacrament of the Eucharist, in some church. This is our holy cup. We use it for that. We don't use it to bail water out of the toilet. We don't use it to, give the dogs drinking water. We don't even use it to drink our own water out of it, but we only use it for the wine, for the, so that's an example of a sacred vessel. It has been kept separate. It is only used for that. So when you see there's whenever you look at examples of religion, you'll see a vision of a sort of a sacredness, something that is only for the holy use. And God, of course, is holy, but the things that are holy are very often beautified, right? We make ornate cups and stuff, but the fact of holiness itself is beautiful. And in fact, beauty is found often in distinctiveness, like that. Meaning something is different and special, unique, and therefore beautiful, because there's only one like it. You know what I mean? Like, there's something, an original sculpture by some famous artist has a greater, impact than one that is mass-produced and sold to tourists. Though, you might say, well, the one that's mass-produced maybe looks more appealing. But there's something intrinsically more special about an original, or something very singular and unique. It's like the last one of anything. You get down to the last one. Like you're making a puzzle with the kids and you get to the last puzzle piece. Everyone wants to do the last piece. Well, they all want to do the last piece. God knows you never get to. As a parent, being a parent means never getting to put the last piece in the puzzle, I guess. So I think I have. I think probably out of frustration at them dithering and pretending like they don't know where it goes, which was always annoying to me. There is a glory due God's name. For what he has done and for what he represents, there's amount of recognition. Glory has to do with recognition. I've talked about it before. It's like the terminology I came up with before is like the perceived the expression of the perceived greatness of an object. Honestly, like if you have a used car salesman like talking about how great some old heap of car is, he's glorifying that vehicle. It may be in a base way, but that's the idea. It is the speech and admiration given that adorns something great, and thereby even magnify the greatness, or at least in the perception of people who see that thing being glorified. Like when Christ was entering into Jerusalem, all the people lining the streets and crying out, "Hosanna in the highest." That was a glorious moment. We worship him in the beauty of holiness because of that specialness that God represents. He is the most singular thing in the entire world, the most worship-worthy object that the mind could imagine. That, the one who is responsible for bringing all things into being is worthy of worship, and there is a certain amount of glory due his name. Though men may not acknowledge it, still it remains. The voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The glory of the Lord thundereth. The Lord is upon many waters. I talked about, this psalm talks about the voice of God. And it was interesting. It's interesting because it's very destructive sort of metaphors, I guess. Yeah, for God's voice. And it's powerful actions. And there's a lot of power in God's voice. God's voice, through his word, he created the heavens and the earth. But, we talked about how Elijah, when he was complaining about the prophets of Baal and how they dug down the altars of God and killed the prophets, and he was left alone. He talked about this, how many people Jehu would slay, and how many people the king of Syria would slay, and how many people Elisha would slay, the prophet. These were all things ordained of God, right? And then he showed this destructive power, this flaming fire, this earthquake. And God was not in it, though God did it. You know what I mean? And the way I take that is like when he talked about Jehu and Azael, I think his name was the king of Syria who was being anointed, and Elisha. When he spoke of those three, and he also spoke of three things: the wind, the earthquake, and the fire. God was obviously with Elisha and all that, but how is it not in? And because I said that my thought is that the still small voice is that which we perceive and hear of God's voice. I mean, it's effectual to us. Like you see God just break up a mountain. And a lot of times people want miracles. I talked about this, Jesus' miracles. Everyone wants to see miracles. And me too. I want to see you say, Paul, hey, you want to see a miracle? Yeah, I'm down for that. Let's see a miracle. Though on the other hand, be careful what you want, look for. There's a lot of different kinds of miracles. You know what I mean? Like I said, thankfully the Lord doesn't have like a black sense of humor. You'd like to see a miracle, like a monkey's paw kind of sense of humor. And I talked about that recently, that story where it was, the wife wished for money, and then I think her son or her husband dies, and they get the insurance money, and then she wishes he hadn't died, and then he comes back from the dead like a zombie. And so it's like this tragic sort of ironic twist of getting everything you want, but it all being so terrible. And things could go that way. Thankfully God is not like that. Just like give you a miracle, but it's like a really bad one, Like, I don't know. Like my barn spontaneously explodes. It's a miracle, It happened for no reason. So, we don't always, God, through his voice, can do things, is what I'm saying. Because his voice is a stand-in for his power. Because by his word, he made the heavens and the earth. And by his word, all his power is exercised. His voice shakes the mountains. His voice is on the waters. It thunders, right? It does all these things. And we marvel and we wonder at it. And we are stand in awe of his majesty and power. But have we learned anything from it? What do we know? And that's why I think that the Lord says that to Elijah, because it is not just the flashy big things we see from God. If we don't understand the meaning, like Paul talked about trumpets, if they give an uncertain sound, you know what I mean? And there are ways in which God can act in the world, and it's happened many times that people just don't understand. Jesus himself spoke in parables. People didn't understand. He spoke in parables and did miracles, and people didn't get it. I think there's a point in Luke 16 where they say to the Lord, they say, And now you speak plainly and speak no proverb. Now we know you are come from God. Because speak, they would hear the words, but not perceive what was said. And to me, the still small voice is like when I speak, what I'm actually saying. You know what I mean? A lot of times people talk. I talk sometimes. And I grapple with my words. And I'm trying to make clear speech. God is always clear in his speech. But sometimes, even when I'm making clear speech, people can't hear me. They can be distracted. They can be, there can be an innumerable number of reasons why, even though I say something perfectly clearly, a given person may not hear or understand what I say. There may be a deficit on their part. It could be some external factor, like something happened. It could be distraction. It could be any number of things, right? It's like the same thing with God. It's like Christ speaks in parables. Like, just a good example. He gives a parable, and the parable has these words. And you can read the words, like a man went out to sow seed, and he sowed some by the wayside, and some among thorns, and some on stony ground, and then some in good soil, and it brought forth, and et cetera, right? He tells that story, and you hear the story. It's like the voice of the Lord breaking down the mountains. You hear it, you see it, you understand the meaning of the words. But the other voice that's speaking quietly in the midst of the words you hear is the meaning. I mean, there's a secondary voice. And if you don't get that voice, the voice of like, what does it mean? That's the whole point of the Bible study I do, is like, what are we talking about? You know what I mean? It's so easy to just read over all this stuff, and it's just a bunch of lingo. Just a bunch of lingo. Holiness and the voice of God. I mean, it's just, might as well, it could, for some people, it is quite merely bullshit. Okay? That's just all it is to them. You know what I mean? And it can be that to you also, if you're not giving heed. Because there is meaning behind what God does and says. It is not just that which is on the face of it, though sometimes sometimes words are given and there is no need to further investigate. You could say something very clear like, thou shalt not kill, right? That's a very clear, seemingly thing to say. But we see from Jesus' teaching that there is more to it than that. Whoever is angry with his brother shall be in danger of the judgment. He said there was so much more to that. You've heard it was said, thou shalt not kill. But another voice is telling me it's not right to be angry with your brother. You shouldn't demean and despise your brother with your language at all, or in your heart. And these are the things that people miss. That's the equivalent of the still small voice. It's not like just a voice in your head, though that is where you will hear it. Obviously, like, when you're listening to a parable, you hear the voice of words, the verbal thing being said. But you also, if you're really listening, and if the Holy Spirit has opened your mind, and this applies to things outside the things of God. It's just, there is meaning underneath the external meaning of words. Often, there's a secondary meaning, and that is often where you find what God is really saying, or the important things that God is saying. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of jargon, a bunch of religious talk. Holiness, the beauty of holiness, worship and glory and power and majesty and breaking stuff. We just have all these words and we understand what it means. Only on the surface. The voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The God of glory thunders. He is upon many waters. Now, in the book of Genesis, obviously, the Spirit of God moves upon the face of the waters and speaks and says, "Let there be light," and there was light. And in all that God created. It started there on the face of the waters. The waters. And waters are what? Waters represent chaos. The waters that God is upon, I don't know that they differ at all from the waters of the abyss. The pit of the abyss, spoken of in Revelation, if it be water. Certainly an abyss speaks to a vast open emptiness, and there are no greater abysses known to man than that which are found in the great seas. I mean, we know that it is this profound depth under the waters, and men have known it for a long time. It's deep down there. And God being on the face of the water, and the earth is mostly, 2/3 covered water, so we got a lot of water, right? It's a big part of the human experience, water. I remember being high when I was young and looking at water with that, altered state of mind, and it really kind of freaked me out. Not freaked out, but it really made an impression on me. The silvery reflective nature, as it reflected in the light on the surface of the water. I mean, it looked almost like a magical substance where, this transparent fluid we pour into ourselves. It looked almost magical, and it's funny to me that we take it for granted. Well, that's what that'll do to you. You start seeing things in a weird way. But, because sometimes maybe is it best to take it for granted? Well, I don't know. There's certainly a lot of spiritual things with water. It's on one hand, the drinking water, fresh water is essential for life, and there's a river of water of life in the kingdom of God. There's a river of water of life coming out of your belly because of the Spirit of God in you. There's this sort of analogy of life-sustaining, life-giving water. But there's also the water of the flood and the water of the abyss. As I talk about, important understanding, various aspects of symbology. In fact, there was a recent thing we did, and I almost thought I was like, I talked about one half, and I was like, I almost had it there in my mind again. It was something about that lifting up. The Lord lift up his people, or something like that. He shall destroy, this idea of building up, lifting up. Oh, yeah. He shall feed them and lift them up forever. And it reminded me of John chapter 15, where there's a part where it says, I am the true vine. Well, this is the first verse. I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, and in my song, I think I say lifts up. But some people say takes away or cuts, or, there's a somewhat confusion on whether it means, at least I'm confused, whether it means lift up. I do gardening and stuff. So when I see a vine straggling on the ground, I raise it. Because they should be raised up. All right? So you tie them up. Or you put some, you don't let them run on the ground. You can't have vines on the ground. All right? Especially grapevines. Cucumbers would be all right. But grapes can't run on the ground. They need to be raised up. And I am the true vine. It's talking about grapes mostly. So there is that. But there also is a sense of taking away. In fact, that's what the King James translate, I think. He takes away. Fruitless branches are removed. And you could look at both ideas. One is more optimistic, whereas someone without fruit, God helps them to bring forth fruit. And the other is that if they have no fruit, God will cut them out and throw them away. But the language only says raise up. And it can connote either thing. But I'm not sure in that specific instance whether that word maybe specifically gives us the right insight. Because sometimes, like I said, sometimes it's purely a matter of context. Water similarly has a sort of a positive, life-giving aspect to it, but then it has this fearsome, abyssal, and wild flood type thing. It represents chaos in that even life itself is kind of a sort of a chaos. And, it's like, it's messy. Life is something, even you think about the human theories about where life comes from, essentially boil down to chaos. If you have enough chaos, eventually you get something that's orderly. Sounds like nonsense to me, but okay. It basically boils down to chaos. But water, in the chaotic churning of the flood, it represents the untamed raw power of nature and the untamed raw power of life. Life itself. Think about life like our vulnerabilities, to viruses and bacteria. When those lives begin to swarm in us, it destroys us. When cancer begins to grow out of control, it kills us. It sucks the life from us and brings life to itself. Ultimately, not, cancer's not a, well, it's a disease. It's interesting, cancer's, you have your cancer because it's literally your cells working against you. It's kind of it's a frightening thing. I didn't watch someone die of cancer, but I observed someone in a few states, my brother. And it's a frightening thing. But, like a churning flood, life can, like a swarm of locusts, it can be like an agent of chaos. Life is both sustaining, fulfilling, beautiful, and also terrible and destructive and, a source for evil. So it has both those aspects, because life is like that. It represents because when things are dead, it's all pretty much predictable. When you have everything dead, you have pretty much, and I'm talking about from a human perspective. To God, there is none, but in that swirling potential, he brings forth order, which is an interesting thing because it's not that, it's not so far off from human theory. That out of the swirling chaos of the abyss, God spoke forth order and light and truth. That out of the things that cannot be made sense of by the mortal mind. I remember I knew a guy we were studying the Bible with years ago. And it was interesting because he was, the people we were studying with the Bible with were from a kind of a cultic group called UBF. But they were all really smart people. They went to the University of Chicago. That's where they were. UBF stood for University Bible Fellowship, and they meant University of Chicago. A lot of smart people, a lot of smart Asians. There's a Korean church basically with some local people. Some white folks in there too, right? There was plenty. It was a very mixed congregation. Mostly very nice people, but they just it was kind of a cult, But one of the things that I was interested in, just mentioning in passing, is that one of the guys we were studying with was studying physics. He actually became a bigwig in that church, and I remember he told me he was writing his not thesis, is it thesis? But some big paper you have to do for your doctorate or for he was a graduate student, so he would be going for his doctorate or something like that, or for some high achievement. He was writing basically on the physics of the motion of fluids. And he was also translating the Bible into Russian. That's the kind of intelligence I was in the presence of. Very smart guy. You think about to predict the behavior of fluids, it requires quite a bit of calculation. It can be done. And certainly God, in the motions of the water, it's like he is in control. That God can be in control of something so chaotic and unpredictable as the abyss, the sea. That's why it's one of the first things here. It's the first things in Genesis. It's one of the most powerful things man comes into, the powerful forces of nature that men come into contact with. The sea is like a once immovable, but ever changing. You can't move it. You can't do anything with it. The ocean, what are we going to do with the ocean? You can push it back a little here and there. As far as control it, get out of here, right? But God's voice thunders across the abyss and makes it calm, or riles it up and spreads it out, like he split the sea for the children of Israel to cross in the Exodus from Egypt. And his voice thunders. He does these. He has this power over these things. The voice of the Lord is powerful. It is full of majesty. What does the word majesty mean? I think I know what it means, but but maybe I don't. But maybe I don't know what it means. Hadar, or it has ornament, splendor. Okay, majesty. Like I said, it has all these things, just like, God, his voice, he told his parables. He would say things, powerful miracles, do things by the power, exercising his power. You could see God exercising power over the waters, thundering over the mountains, over the waters, thundering over the mountains, his powerful voice sounding out over the seas. And see, in the, and a lot of this may be just in the roaring of the sea. The prophet is hearing, like I hear in the roar of the sea, the power of God's voice. That can be true too. The floods have lifted up their voice. The floods have lifted up their voice, But the Lord is mightier than the voice of many waters, than the waters of the sea. So it's not that God's voice is that thing, but it is a mighty thing to which the voice of the Lord can be compared. It breaks the cedars. It breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He has control over the abyss. He has power and majesty. He breaks the cedars. Now, cedars of Lebanon are mentioned often in the scriptures. It is from where they obtained it was a notable forested area up in Lebanon, in the mountains there, from which the lumber to build much of Jewish civilization came from. So the, like when the children of Israel returned from the captivity, it says, you all live in houses of cedar, but where's my house? And people build things of cedar because cedar repels insects and therefore is less susceptible to rot, obviously, because water will rot wood, but insect activity plus water, it's like, forget it, right? You're done. Well, insects don't care for cedar because of the resins. There's powerful resins, and it has a very distinctive smell. Like my barn is made out of cedar. When I cleaned it, I remember I walked in, it smells beautiful. So, but they are also, not only is it this wood that's preferred for that, it's a wood that's used for a lot of things like that, because not only is it repel insects, it's strong. It's good for using in construction, as far as I know. Certainly good enough. I don't know that you're going to build pyramids out of it, but the great trees, and when I did Ezekiel 28, I have a song, but I do have Ezekiel 28 song, but I was thinking of Ezekiel 31, where it talks about Egypt. Who are you like in your greatness? Behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon, with fair branches, right? And so the cedars of Lebanon are also symbolic of, at one time, well, let's say, rulers and authorities, the tall trees. It's interesting, the tall trees like cedars are likened to and they grow very tall, obviously, are likened to to like the cedars of Lebanon. Are some of the tallest trees in the forest. I think they are. I don't know, but anyways, I assume they must be because they are likened to earthly leaders often, or earthly leaders are like the cedars of Lebanon. There's something that grow up out of the earth and seem to be big. In Ezekiel 28, the prophet talks about all the cedars of Lebanon, basically how there's this one tree who exalts himself above all the others, and he is brought down, and and all this happens in that story. But from that we get the idea of, and of course I liken that. I think that is a lesson and a type of Satan, and it is part of the Old Testament theme where we derive our understanding about Satan. I remember I took someone with, one time someone who studied with me, who was a very intelligent young man, he was talking to me about how he felt like these passages were not really talking about Satan. And I'm like, well, they're not. They're not. On the face of it, it's not talking about Satan. But it's totally talking about Satan at the same time. It's like I said, there's an undercurrent. And the way I think I proved it to him, he never said I proved it, but I'm pretty sure I did, because I just gave him such a good argument. I think he probably just took it. Basically, that if you look at the New Testament, the way they talk about Satan, where did they get these ideas? And I go back, I'm like, where in the Old Testament, besides these passages like Ezekiel 28, Ezekiel 31, Isaiah 14, where else are they picking up this idea? The ideas that we see like in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 about it, opposing and exalting himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he is God, sits in the temple of God, making a show of himself that he is God. If he didn't get that from Isaiah 14, are you saying it's just a totally special new revelation and they're not connected at all? Because I think they are connected. Of course, Isaiah 14 is talking about the king of Babylon. But in that the king of Babylon represents like a leader gone bad, all leaders gone bad follow a kind of a pattern. Just like all good kings are going to follow a pattern that's going to point to the King of Kings. You know what I mean? If you take all the good aspects of what a king ought to be, and you extract that from every king that's ever been, like all the good things, and you put that together, it's like you get an image of what would approximate what Christ is like. The ultimate expression of what a good king would be. And so you talk about David, you see David, but David had flaws and stuff, so you can't take that stuff, but you extract the good aspects, and you have the King of Kings. And so also with the cedars of Lebanon and Satan, it's like ultimately Satan is one of the cedars of Lebanon, but it also uses it of good things. Make me like the cedars of Lebanon, planted by the waters, and fed and growing and rising up like that. So it's not all negative, but they are tall and strong. And sometimes things that are tall and strong become lifted up in pride. They become prideful in their strength. They become prideful in their position. Tall and strong, metaphorically, like a leader is tall and strong above his people. It's kind of interesting. You may remember there was a genocide in Rwanda back in the late 90s. And one of the things is the Tutsis and the Hutus were, they had a conflict goes back that's, part of it has to do with colonialism and who knows what, they were not of the same tribe, but they were lumped into one nation. And I don't know all the delicacies of it, but one of the things when they were going out to slay all the Hutus, they were saying cut down the tall trees because they were taller, and that was the reason the Europeans favored them, and they had been set apart as like a different class of people. Many of them were taller, And in fact, they would attack sometimes tall people just because they were tall, because it's kind of like you seem like you might be a Hutu. And but why do I bring that up? Well, just because of the tall trees. Those that are exalted, those that are in positions of authority, can be likened to cedars of Lebanon in the Bible. You'll find that theme repeated. And it has to do with exaltation and strength. But the exalted and strong things of the earth, the voice of God breaks them. You know what I mean? It breaks them. It breaks their power. It breaks their hold on the earth. It breaks them down. The things that seem strong in the world, the people that seem strong, God breaks. He can break them in pieces and etc. Okay? But he makes them also to skip like a calf. He can break them, or it's like I said, it's not just bad. Because not every king was despised of God, and David was God's king. David is also a cedar of Lebanon in that sense, of an exalted person in a position of strength, right? An exalted person in a position of strength was also David. And so he makes him to skip like a calf. Lebanon and Sirion like a young unicorn. And sometimes you go out, like this morning I woke up, it doesn't look so nice now, it's kind of like a little overcast. When I first woke up, man, it was the blue sky, the sun was shining, reflecting off everything, the green light of everything growing and just shining in my windows, and the yellow light of the sun in the morning. It is just glorious. And I could feel like the whole hillside ready to skip and rejoice and have a happy day. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, ever been in the world, and when the world just seems like a happy place? You know what I mean? And from that you get the idea that, God breaks them, with the storm and the wind and the tempest, but he also makes them to dance and skip like a calf. Which of course is a very ridiculous piece of imagery, right? We're dealing in a major. This is a major metaphor. Actually, it's a simile, obviously, but it's a simile wrapped in a metaphor, actually, because like a calf, he doesn't make them like a calf. He makes them skip like a calf. So part of it is a sort of a metaphor, the skipping, and calf. And skip, I would think more like frolic. I don't know if you've ever seen calves. We have, I've had, I've seen my fill of calves. But when they're out in the beautiful day, sometimes you will see calves begin to frisk and frolic. They just start to kind of get going, and they kick their feet up, back and forth, and they kind of do this like loping. You can tell you can just tell it's happiness, and they're skipping along in their, cowsy way. Cowsy. Enjoying the world. And then the young unicorn. Again, King James only people. Lebanon and Sirion are skipping like a unicorn. I guess if you're King James only, you believe in the unicorn. Now, there are one-horned animals. I used to say, well, maybe it's talking about the rhinoceros, even though rhinoceroses generally have two horns. They have the one, two. I don't know that the King James, like our mythical understanding of a horse with a horn as a unicorn is what is meant by the King James. Is that the only... Obviously we have a word unicorn that goes back quite a ways. Is it just that mythical beast? Or is it, it's funny, there are several creatures with singular horns, like the narwhal, but I think that's a tooth. Right, that big, long spike out of the narwhal's face. I thought that was like a tusk, basically. So, God makes the cedars to skip and frisk like a young animal. Unicorn is probably like wild ox or something like that. It's just something, unicorn. The Hebrew word does not mean animal with one horn. Okay? whereas the English unicorn means one-horned animal. Though actually, when it's funny, as I look at it, I'm like, why is a unicorn? Why isn't it unihorn? What's that about? Don't know what to think about it. Unicorn. Why? How did we end up with that word? Unicorn. Maybe it has to do something with like Latin. I don't know. So do I have anything more to say about that? Probably, but I think we can just move along. It's, the metaphor. Well, God can break rulers and make rulers rejoice. He can take the strength and the style. Something that is so firmly planted. You know what I mean? The idea of making a tree get up and skip around like a calf. You know what I mean? Is, that's very, it's outlandish. That's the saying, is like the power of God can make them skip. I obviously in a metaphorical sense, I understand what it means as far as like the hills are alive with the sound of music or whatever. But also if you take it literally, he breaks the cedars. We take that literally. I can't take it literally because the only way I can think of it literally is if it's like, he blows them over and breaks them, and then they tumble off like tumbleweeds, skipping along as they go, I guess. I don't think so. I think this part can only be understood in a metaphorical sense. And that's good because, it gives us the room to look at things metaphorically in all of this because of that. Meaning putting this one very outlandish statement in the midst of this stuff that you could be taking very concretely and literally, though I believe it's literally true. God's voice breaks the cedars in half and all that. Sure. But when it says this, it's not meaning that like he was watching one day and I heard the voice of God and the cedars jumped up out of the ground with their roots like the Ents in Lord of the Rings, and began traipsing around the countryside, dancing even. Don't think that's what it meant. But in terms of leaders, yes, he makes the leaders to dance to his tune, to skip, to his word. To rejoice at his presence, to rejoice in the majesty of God. Leaders like David, like Hezekiah, like the other leaders that of Israel that pleased God. The voice of the Lord divideth the flames of fire. Interesting there, huh? Because my mind immediately goes to Pentecost. There appeared unto them cloven tongues of fire. There appeared cloven, divided tongues of fire. So God divides the flames of fire. And why is this important? Well, you've obviously probably split a flame. If you've ever taken a candle to another candle, you know that you can split flames like that. But but what do they have in mind? I don't know. What does the prophet have in mind when he says that? The voice of the Lord divides the flames of fire. Because fire, is fire indivisible? Well, it's hard to divide fire. Like like if I just have flames, if I have a burning fire, how do I divide it? You know what I mean? Like I can take a flame from I could light this pencil on fire. Probably want to wrap it in an oily rag first, and then I can take another one of the same thing, right? And I can shift the fire over, but that's not what it's talking about. When you burn stuff, there's the flames arise, and it is another thing that is an image of chaos, right? Because the action of flame is the actual substance of the flame is something we call plasma, I believe. Is it not? I could be wrong. Because like flame actually has some sort of a substance. There's actually a thing there. You can see the flame. Right? And the flame is obviously, we use certain metaphors for flames. We say the flames were licking the wood. Right? Flames tend to lick at things. Like if you hold up a flame, it will kind of lick at it. Because it doesn't instantly just cause things to burst into flames. Because it has to have heat. Like if I take a match, like I could work all day with a match to set this on fire, but it's not a big enough fire. The flame would lick it and char it and give me all kinds of problems, but actually getting it to just hold a flame would be very difficult. It wouldn't be so difficult in a furnace. I could stick this in for a couple of moments and come out and it would be on fire. But when you have a large body of flame, there's all this flames. The flames are like when you watch fire, like I had, we were burning wood and there was wind out and it was causing this vortex of flame, and it's chaos. As, you know what I mean? As far as I'm concerned, just like the water, I can't subdivide, I can't process the chaos of the fire. I can't break it down into orderly bits. You know what I mean? I can't break it down into something that my mind can, to deal with. But God's voice divides the flames of fire. You know what I mean? It sets fire into order. It takes the chaos and makes order of it. That's what I think it means. And just like with the waters, fire is another agent of chaos, right? I mean, for obvious reasons. It burns. It burns, it destroys, it can cause explosions, right? Fire is very dangerous, chaotic element. Forest fires, house fires, the fires of hell. And there's also the fire of God's Spirit, the fire of passion, the fire of, it represents a potential of energy. The flames in the human heart is another metaphor we use, right? But of course, the tongue's analogy. The tongue is a fire. It is set on fire of hell. Who can tame it? God tames the untamable. He divides the indivisible. The thing which is the most wild in nature is God's. It's just clay in his hands. It's his plaything. He has absolute dominion over all. The flames of fire, the chaos of the flame. He divides and sets in order. And also you could say he divides fire from fire. From the, I think all just the fiery things, like the 3 Hebrew children in the fiery furnace. The flames did not hurt them. They didn't even smell like smoke when they came out, right? They walked through the midst of the fire. You can even look at that as dividing the flames of fire. Like if you have to walk through the midst of the fire, God will make a way. Just like he divided the sea, he can divide the flames of fire. That's another way of looking at it I just thought of. He divides the fire in that he moves it. Like if you're facing the flames, say, I've got to go through the fire. The voice of God is that which is splitting it and making a way for you to go through the fiery trial. That's another possible way of looking at it. I'm not saying, it's funny. I like I always say, I can be totally wrong and I'm still totally right. You know what I mean? Because all those interpretations may not be what David had in mind, but they are all biblical and reasonable as far as reasonable ways to look at what he's saying. The voice of the Lord shaketh the wilderness. The Lord shaketh the wilderness of Kadesh. Again, another analogy of nature and the wild, and that represents chaos and the world that man is not able to control, the wilderness. From whence come the destructive beasts, from whence come unknown things. Enemies crossing the wilderness, coming into your territory. The wilderness is shaking. at the voice of God. Because the wilderness is another immovable sort of thing. It's like men can push back at it, but it is still something that is standing in the way of our progress. And God shakes the things that are in our way. The things that house the fearsome things that we don't know, the unknown. He makes the hinds to calve. Hinds is, I believe, a word for deer. And discovers the forest. That means he uncovers the forest, meaning in the secret places of the forest. In fact, what is the it's funny because as I go through the Bible again and again, I start getting a clearer sense of what some of these things mean. That for years, I would kind of read, like in the prophets, they'll talk about things like the thickets of the forest. And you're like, what does he mean? It's going to sound out in the thickets of the forest. Like, for example, I just want to look up one. I just really want to see this passage in Isaiah at this moment. I just want to see it. So hold on, let me look it up. I'm trying to think. It's like, what is it? It's 8 or 9 or... I think I just need to look up thickets. Oh, there's 4 thickets in the entire Bible. Isaiah 9. I'm actually the one... Neither of those things... Well, look at... like, see here, it's like... Wickedness burneth as the fire, shall devour the briars and thorns, and shall kindle in the thickets of the forest. And they shall mount up like the lifting up of smoke. He shall cut down the thickets of the forest with iron, and Lebanon shall fall by a mighty one. See, the idea of thickets in the forest and discovering forest secret. Secrets of the forest. No, it's always thickets. But I'm conflating the idea of the secrets of the forest with the thickets of the forest. And because he talks here about uncovering or discovering the forest. Because the forest is like a closed realm. It represents the unknown. The wilderness is the unknown part of the world. It's that which you look and it's like, I remember being at a forest preserve and it had trails and stuff, but the forest part was kind of untouched. And it was like you couldn't really even penetrate in it. I mean, you could, but it was just thick with undergrowth and stuff. And the forest is an important, there's something about the forest. Phil Oakes, the folk musician, one of my favorites of all time, said, "The factories of the forest hide 1,000 crimes," or something. I forgot the exact words, but it was from his song about Mississippi. The factories of the forest basically was saying like there's a lot of dead bodies, hidden in the forest. And that's where people take dead bodies to hide them. They hide them in the forest. They take them into the thickets where no man will tread, or they hope no man will tread. And that's where they dump the bodies, and that's where they put their secrets. That's true. That's where they dump the bodies. Men do evil things, and then they go into the wilderness. And they try to hide what they've done in the areas where no man treads. No man but treads there. Where no man treads. They want to hide their evil deeds. I think that also I don't know. There's a lot with that. A lot I still haven't understood. But I'm thankful even in this moment that my mind's been opened up like that to what that forest represents, and also uncovering the forest. There's secrets in the forest. And the forest can therefore represent secret things, hidden things. Just like the manner by which children are brought to being. A woman in her womb has a child secretly. Like Mary hid herself after she was pregnant. I think it was Mary, was it Elizabeth? But women can hide the fact that they're pregnant. They have, for the first few months, a woman can be pregnant and only she knows. A woman can be like 3 months pregnant and nobody knows. There's a secret in the forest, something hidden. I think also there's something of some part of the temple was also a forest. I mean, like the temple was built from cedar and overlaid with gold, as I recall. And so also there is a forest analogy that is applied to the king's house and also to the temple. And often, like I said, cut down the tall trees. The people who are in charge, the exalted people. The cedars of Lebanon in the forest is where all the secrets are hidden. You see just the tall trees above everything, and everything else is chaotic and unknown and strange. In his temple does everyone speak? You go to God's temple, and everyone's talking about his glory. Not when I go to church, though. When I go to church, everyone's talking about their carnal existence and their life, and not a lot of speaking of the glory of God, unfortunately, when you go to church. I mean, you'll hear the pastor maybe talk about it, but then when it's time to fellowship, apparently all we have in common is that we like to drive trucks, and whatever else that I say drive trucks. I mean in jest, because I just remember that one of the things I observed being discussed while I was trying to perform a scripture song one time was the guy was talking about the new mud flaps he'd purchased for his truck. And this is in a church that celebrates the Sabbath on a Saturday. And they make a big deal about it. It's the Sabbath, it's the holy day of God. And I thought, what bugged me was just the hypocrisy. I mean, that there was a certain hypocrisy in just saying, hey, I lost track of my thought because I actually looked at my other computer. But there's a certain hypocrisy in it, with people and religion and that. You remember where I was. Because that's all I really need to say. There's a certain hypocrisy. Certain hypocrisy of going to church on a day, of being like, Saturdays the men ought to worship God, and you better well be in church on that day, because it's the Sabbath day of God, and we follow the law of God. And then you don't keep it holy. Because what does it mean to keep it holy? It's too complicated. If I have to keep a whole day holy, I don't know if I can keep a whole day holy. I mean, I probably could, right? It's not too hard for you. The Jews do it all the time, Orthodox Jews, right? I'm just trying to keep my whole life. The thing is, I realized Jesus taught me that I got to keep my whole life holy. So I'm not going to get caught up on a single day when I've got a whole life to worry about. Though it's arguable, you could say, well, let's start with a single day and work your way outward from there. And then so you might have a point. Let me see. We're almost at the last verse. The Lord sitteth upon the flood. Yea, the Lord sitteth king forever. And he sitteth upon the flood. The flood. Also, waters represent people, right? And also the chaos. The floods, also the powerful chaos, the churning potential of the world, of the created things, that God would form the created things into something. Also of the people, that God would form the people into something. Something worth preserving forever, into his kingdom, into his house. Because there is a multitude of people. A multitude of people cry out like the voice of many waters. Like the voice of mighty thundering, saying, Hallelujah, for the Lord God omnipotent reigneth. I think that's the one they say right then. But, it's like in the book of Revelation, it talks about the voice of many waters, like the voice of mighty thunderings. The voice of God's people sounds like a rushing of the mighty waters, and the voice of God is like a rushing of mighty waters. God sits enthroned upon the flood, upon the power, upon that chaos, upon that potential. King forever. He can make it into something meaningful. His voice changes mere destruction into beauty. His voice changes, human arrogance and exaltation into an object lesson. The voice of God doesn't just break these things, but in so doing delivers truth and message to man that we could understand and perceive the nature and works of God. That's how these things do these things. That's why the still small voice that is running underneath, God breaks the flood. Well, what's that mean? You know what I mean? So, I think we've understood a lot of the meaning. I mean, obviously we haven't gotten all of it out there, but I didn't want to spend a full, we've already gone 10 minutes over in this psalm. I want to wrap it up. The Lord will give strength to his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace. We give strength to God, glory to God, and God strengthens us. He sits upon the waters, upon the floods of potentials. He burns. He divides the tongues for us. Divides the flames of fire. Divides the words. Makes our words the right words. I mean, when he gave the tongues to them, they spoke as the Spirit gave utterance. We speak as the Spirit gives utterance. He can divide our words. The tongue can no man tame, but God is not a man. Now, Jesus became a man, but God himself, in his ultimate nature, is not a man. We are men made in God's image, and Christ became a human. But his essence is not a human essence, but a divine essence. And he therefore has the power to bless us with peace, and he used all the aspects of his power and his control over nature and the world to bring all things together, to work together for good for you, because you love and trust him. And in that you should gain much confidence. Because God is powerful and he is for you. Anyway, so have peace. Be blessed with peace this weekend. And I look forward to being back again on Monday to continue studying the Psalms. I'm not sure when exactly we're going to break. I'm considering going to the end of... here's my Bible again. The Psalms, remember we talked about there being a Genesis portion of Psalms, and I think it ends somewhere in the 40s, the Genesis portion of the Psalms, and we will probably just go, let's see, I'll tell you right now. I think since the Genesis one ends with 41, we'll probably go to 41 and take a break. And that will be a nice start on the Psalms. We'll have gotten nearly a third. Or you could say more than a quarter in a 5-part study. So that means the other ones will not be as long. Well, they will be long, though. I mean, because some of those Psalms are much longer than what we've dealt with here. So 41 is, I think, the minimum we can go to before we break. So I think we will continue. We will continue with Psalm 30 on Monday. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to being back again. Until then, have a blessed and peaceful weekend.
Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, thou desirest truth in the inward parts, in the hidden part thou shalt make me to know wisdom. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Make me to hear joy and the gladness, that the bones which thou hast broken may rejoice. Hide thy face from my sins, and blot out all mine